What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, Prof. Doomcoft here, and we are back with episode 112 of the video game therapy series. I'm not sure. It's been probably a few weeks at this point. Again, I don't really keep track of these things, but we're back, and I'm at the gold farm fixing things because I screwed it up the first time I built it. Anyway, the first thing I want to talk about, which maybe is related to other things I'll talk about in this episode, but just where I want to start is just this almost like collective unease that I feel, and I don't know how. I mean, my intuition is that it is widespread, but it's hard to definitively point to anything around this. But it feels like everybody, or again, save those that are in some kind of denial, I would say. It's kind of uneasy about the future, and part of this is just the fear mongering of mainstream media. It's very profitable and lucrative to keep people in these like perpetual states of just fear. Just everything is scary. The world is scary. Natural disasters. Economic turmoil. Your parents are going to molest you. I mean, there's just all these, just like everything is designed to just try to terrify you so that you don't leave your house and you just stay inside and order DoorDash or whatever. And I want to blame, I suppose, the majority of this like collective, the collective conscious being uneasy on that. But I even feel just deeply in my meditative sessions that there is kind of this, again, I'll say kind of collective uneasiness with the future and the direction that humanity's headed. And again, my faith is that there is, and I use the word faith there on purpose, is that there will be a corrective push. So it's not like my fears around the end of humanity. I don't think that a nuclear Armageddon or Holocaust or whatever you want to call it, I don't know what the right word is imminent. And I do think there is, a future for humanity in some sense, but I do think that even a human in a cave might just sense, like the shaman or something, whatever you want to view as just a kook inside of cave predicting the future, feels like there's something wrong, and feels like there is kind of a time of great change. And I suppose that's the one thing I could say definitively is that I do think there will be it will be a time of great change. Like if things are expected to stay the same, what do you mean by that? and no, if it would be what I say, I would disagree with that. I just think there's a lot of change that's inevitable, and things will change. But and again, perhaps for the worse in the near future. That's kind of why I'm feel this kind of uneasiness. But in the long term, things will correct back into something more stable and more optimistic. But I feel now that the natural state of a person, again, one that's not even like plugged in. I'll say, not to say that I'm that person, but even somebody who's living would feel this unrest within the species of humanity. Because I do think we share some kind of. I'm not a full like collective consciousness believer in the sense that like we are all one and one is everything. I do think there are kind of this. There's some perhaps physical or non-physical or spiritual phenomena that does connect us all in some way. And that thread is more or less just what I'm tapping into, and I feel that optimism or that pessimism. I mean, not to say that it's impossible to be optimistic, but pessimism feels like the more I don't know, universal state of affairs now. But that being said, the media is in large part to blame just because of how profitable and lucrative negative things are. Which is not to say that there aren't negative things happening and everything is great, because there's a lot of people that like they mean almost sound brain dead in the sense that they're like, well, things are better, things are improving. I mean, there's just sure, I suppose you could point to examples of things that but things are genuinely in a lot of ways, economic or other, getting much worse for a lot of people. I suppose if they're not getting much worse for you, then I would analyze where you stand, right? Are you really in touch with I'll say not the average, but the median, right? I think averages are very, and data analysis is very sneaky with this because like I said, if you look for any kind of pattern within a set of data, you can almost just generate it. I mean, I don't know if you've tried doing this before, but get a large data set of some kind and generate some kind of, again, plausible to you hypothesis on something. And it's quite likely that you might find something again that maybe might have statistical biases and problems and things, but a lot of times you can cook that into something to where it's like, wow, this actually supports my idea. Maybe I was right. But I'd posit that even if you know took your hypothesis, claimed the opposite, you could still find something that would substantiate your claim and I guess support some kind of fear-based phenomenon, or not, right? I mean, it just there's like what you look for, you will find, and I think that's really true. And it doesn't, and data, hiding behind data or hiding behind science, does not absolve you of that problem. That problem still exists, no matter what you're using as your support mechanism, even if it is just God that you're using, or Jesus, or Allah, or Vishnu, whoever your religious person. I mean, even that is like just as I almost don't even. It's not that I don't draw a distinction between using religion to back up some kind of claim and science, but to act like it's just because it's data driven or it's quote unquote scientific, making it like foolproof against criticism or against bias is silly, right? Because even studying the science of bias, right? That even that is a science, and I think people now are less nuanced than ever. So I think it's even sillier just to hide behind some veneer of like, well, we're rationality because we're using science, quote unquote. It's like, well, anyone can just claim science and do it, but ultimately, like, science is built on being skeptical. So my skepticism being met with and answered with science doesn't really make that much scientific sense, in my opinion. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I just don't buy like even just these like data driven approaches to like average thing. It's like, oh, our average income is improving. It's like, well, I don't. What about the median? What about all the other things? What about geographic? Like, what about geographic? It's just possible that like the average income is being skewed heavily in somewhere. There's like there's any number of ways to represent data in a way that serves your purpose. And because now people are very attuned to like wanting to hear data driven approaches, it's simply the people who are the best at manipulating data results in their favor, to curry favor in some way, are the ones that get influence over, I'll even say public opinion. But again, I feel like regardless of whatever the data says, I don't really care. It is very possible it's not true, and it's just you're being lied to. Um, I don't know. I really just, it's like anything with an appreciable viewership, I immediately view with skepticism, only because I then question the origins and the motives behind those things. And not to say that we should remain schizophrenic and then it should be the default mode of everybody to be skeptical of anything, but you certainly need some people who are skeptical of anything, and people to call them out on, and people to and because the thing is, it's not like act like people these conspiracy theories. Sure, and I've said this before. I'm not like I'm saying anything new here. Surely not all of them are completely and utterly wrong, right? Even the craziest thing. That's like the one thing, the argument people make is like, well, isn't this just crazy that people would believe that? Yeah, it's crazy, but did you know that the world is a very crazy place? That incredibly, like, statistically impossible, quote unquote, things, which again is kind of a hard thing to say anyway, statistically impossible. This happen all the time. So the fact that like this sounds crazy or it seems crazy should not be, sure, like intuitively you can think that it's, improbable, but to say that it's like wrong, I think is a dangerous, hill to sit on most of the time. It's because even the craziest conspiracy theories, again, they crazy sounding, right? Some of them end up just being true, and that's just the way that it is. And maybe it's not a lot of percent, maybe it's not 95%, maybe it's not everything that you'll read on, Truth Social or whatever conspiracy theory vector you're getting. But to think that they're all of them are wrong all the time and they've never been right is a little ridiculous. Now, again, so you can argue over what the clip is. You can say it's 10%. You can say it's 1%. You can say it's 0.001%. But to say it's zero is, I think, crazier than any one conspiracy that you could believe, because it certainly isn't zero, and it certainly isn't 60. So there's something in between that. So I just think the nuance has just been completely shattered from this, and you're either just kind of this crazy conspiracy theory nut job that believes any conspiracy, or you don't believe any of them, which I think is also stupid. Really, there's not a single one. I don't trust anybody that doesn't at least believe in one conspiracy theory. And again, conspiracy theory is kind of even like a derogatory term. Like to say that I don't know, a lot of the food that people eat is crap, and you could call it poison or rat poison or something like that. It sounds conspiratorial in that sense, but go read the ingredients label on a Pop Tart and tell me, that's like, a good thing to be feeding a 10-year-old. Like, no, like, that's not a conspiracy at all. It's just we eat like shit, and we should put people in jail that actually make that stuff. But it's very profitable, of course, to sell things as conspiracy theories and to I guess to have life lived around fear, which I think is the hardest mode to exist now. It is not one that is like secure or I just think the hardest thing to be now in today's age is just not scared, right? Because everything is meant to terrify you into this state of shock where it's the world is too dangerous. You'll never have enough money. You'll never make any friends. You'll never have you never have kids. You're already probably impotent because of the poisons that you'll get. You never can afford anything. You'll never buy your own house. It's like everything is meant to just like, first of all, feed you this idea that you need a bunch of crap, like that you need to be gambling or doing anything that most of it is crap. You don't need to do hardly any of it. Perhaps I think there. I mean, you can do a lot less. Whatever you're doing, you don't have to do all of it. But second, that it's just like it's all doomed and there's just no hope and everything is gone. It's just I think just fear is just such a prevalent mode of being now that I think the most bold and audacious way to exist now is just without fear, just not being scared of the future. And like people often view that with like shock or just like, oh, you're just being silly. Like I'm being naive in the sense that I'm not terrified about my retirement or something. I don't give a fuck about I don't give a fuck about my retirement. Retirement, I could be dead. I mean, it's like not to say that I should be thinking about being dead tomorrow or anything like that, but like the fact that I need to be spending all of a Wednesday afternoon terrified about my retirement account or my imaginary stocks that I don't even have because I don't have any money in the stock. Like the idea that I should be terrified of that and following the news and about like the weather in Oklahoma, it's like going to be bad and there's going to be snow. I don't give a fuck. I don't care. And I don't have to care. That's the thing. It's not required of me to give a fuck about everything that's happening all over the world with everybody. It's like I don't care that somebody somewhere named Jason just died. And it was probably, yeah, sure, it was a terrible thing. I mean, sure, condolences. I don't give a fuck. It's not my problem. I don't know the guy. It's not me. And it's like, if my day comes, don't shed a tear over me. I don't care. If it's some random YouTuber that got his head chopped off with a machete, yeah, it's a terrible thing. And she'd be scared of the machete people running around. It's like, no, I don't give a fuck. And you shouldn't either. Even if it's me, don't care about it. You don't have to care. And don't have to be terrified. You don't have to exist in this. I don't know. It just makes you incredibly malleable because if you're scared, you're willing to kind of sacrifice anything to like not be scared anymore, right? You're willing to like, hand the keys over in some ways. And I think that's kind of what's happening on this digital front that is causing a lot of people not to kind of throw up their hands. It's like, well, Google is surveilling everything and they have all the reins they have on the digital landscape is so vast that you'll never be able to be secure. You'll never have anything private. There's no such thing as a private conversation anymore. It's hopeless. And it's like, I think this is a perfect battlefield for fear because then it breeds this passivity and this like, well, I'm not going to do anything because it's hopeless. And well, I'm not an IT person, so I can't do any of this. Or well, I have to have my Candy Crush because otherwise I'm going to be in it. It's like, you don't have to like this fear and being scared of everything all the time just leads to this very like you make himself the perfect little sheep to do anything and to just not take orders or just to be taking orders blindly and not ever question anything. So I guess the only really call to action here that I'm making is that again, to what extent you're able, which I think people are underestimating, you don't have to live your life like a little terrified little puppy who can't do anything, whose entire reins of their life is out of their hands and they can't make any decision for themselves. It's all out of their control, and it's the government's fault, or maybe it's women's fault. Or everyone needs some kind of scapegoat now, and it's hilarious what people come up with in terms of like what their scapegoat is. And like, well, my scapegoat often is like tech people because I genuinely think that for a lot of technological problems. Now, again, I'm not blaming the large large scale or global economic problems on tech people. Although they bear some responsibility, but some people just need to have some kind of scapegoat. Everyone wants to have a scapegoat, and sometimes it's on these like weird religious people. It's like they blame Christians for all those problems, and if there weren't these stupid fundamental evangelical Christians running around, we'd have no problems at all. It's like, well, all right, that's a bit ridiculous. And some people go as far as they, blame it on Jews or something, which again are all equally ridiculous. But the fact that it's like one coordinated group of people that's like source of everyone's problems is silly. And I even include billionaires in that sense, because it's like it's easy to kind of blame things. It's like, well, this billionaire class, we're so greedy. Ultimately, not to say that we should like absolve them of any responsibility, because they are very responsible for the atrocities, but they got to be billionaires because people like you and me gave them money because we were retarded. And that's like, again, that isn't to say that you should never blame anybody for anything all the time, but the fact that like to blame all of your problems on somebody else is just kind of classic, human hubris, to think it's like it's not your fault. It's some group of people, right? It's women's fault, or it's men's fault, or it's the Christian man or the Jewish women. It's like, who gives a fuck? Like, why are you spending all this time trying to like slice up and divvy up and figure out what percentage of people is to blame for what thing? It's like, ultimately, what's happened has happened. We are where we are. What can we do about it now? All right. Now, sure, there are billionaires that should pay their taxes or whatever. There are people that waste our taxes. All right. So there's several groups of people that are responsible for something, and let's go about absolving that in some way. Let's focus on maybe not even just like helping and supporting the billionaires as they try to give away their money, but to figure out vectors in which it's not unreasonable for that not to happen again. Right. You can't. I mean, I don't know. It's just like the idea that it's like never. It's just like this one scapegoat's problem. It's not anything to do with you. Is another problem too. People then don't have any sense of personal responsibility. And I think there's an extreme too, where it's like too much personal responsibility, where it's like everything is your fault. But I do honestly think that life is a bit more cathartic. Now, I'm not saying it's easier, but it's more cathartic when you do kind of assume that anything is your fault. And again, most things are not your fault. The amount of money you have now probably has very little to do with you or your merits or your abilities. And because we certainly don't live in any true meritocracy, at least not one that values any kind of sense of moral judgment of any kind. And it's not to say, so it's not that nothing is your, but life is easier if you accept a lot of blame and then work with what you can. And again, assign blame when necessary, but don't spend all of your time assigning blame. Or spend all of your time feeling bad that it's your fault, right? Because maybe some things are your fault, kind of, and you made them that way, and you have to fix it. But feeling bad about it doesn't really solve the problem either. So I don't know. I just would encourage people to have some nuance in who they're blaming for what, and I don't know, because I just think it's very easy to live in this bubble where you're just spending all your time just blaming things or blaming people on certain things, or it's just this one group of people that's all the problems. It's like, well, it's probably a lot more than that, right? And if it's predominantly that, then fine. But again, I think it's silly, and especially to draw things on the basis of like race or religion of some kind. Not to say that there aren't more violent religions, or even in that case, races that have different cultural values, but people do have different cultural values. Some people don't believe in free speech, and that's interesting, right? I'm not saying, I think they're wrong, but that's kind of the beauty of the world, is that like I wasn't spawn camped and murdered because I believe in free speech. Like, we can both kind of exist. And sure, maybe it's like part of it's a matter of like, education about, why should free speech of some kind exist. But that's kind of, we both get to exist, and it's not really my job to impart my values on other people. But how do you exist when people have different values on things? How do you craft a society, or even can you? That's really one question you could ask. Is it even possible to craft a society in which you have people that don't believe in free speech and people that do? How do they exist simultaneously? Do they have to be in different geographical parts of the world, right? It's like, well, maybe some areas of the world don't have to have, maybe democracy is good for people that believe in free speech, but people that don't, maybe aren't going to thrive in the idea or in a democratic environment. And so it's like, okay, well, what other kind of types of governments are there? I also don't think that there's just this like perfect perennial style of governance that just solves all of the problems, right? I don't think that really exists either. I do think things can exist. There's certain elements of democracy with certain things that make sense. There's certain elements of, I'll even say, autocracy that make sense with certain things. There's certain elements of libertarianism that helps. Free market ideals make a lot of sense in certain areas. There are other areas where maybe it's more socialist or communist in some sense. I just think there's a lot of balance and these maybe balances are across geographic regions. Some geographic regions maybe won't respond well to things like that, and others are more, I don't know, cultural in nature. But I guess speaking with America, it's easy to see that we've lost a lot of the nuance, and people like to paint big brushes with things. And I don't know, this all kind of feeds into this idea of like, oh, we have to win. And it's like, well, win what? And what are we winning and for who? And do you really expect that to last? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why this got political. This isn't really political, but why it sounds political. But I don't know. This is more of I guess, a individual topic, I suppose. Where does one, or where do you get one? How do you get your validation? Because I think a crux of the human experience is to feel validated in some way. Some people get their validation through fame, right? It's not even about the money. It's just about the recognition and the fact that they're well known, and they have some kind of, they have the ear of people. That is what gives them validation. And whether or not they even like, it's just like, well, have you heard of me? Well, then they get the validation from that, which is, is something. Some people get validation from artifacts that they produce, right? They're artisans of some kind. They make something, they give it away, and it's like their validation is what they see in their product, in their creation. It's another way to feel validated. Others is just about, I guess, more immaterial things like money, which is, again, is one way to feel validated. If you have a number that represents, maybe it's representative of the stuff that you've produced or what you've made. Maybe that's why they feel that validated that way. Not that I agree with that, but that's certainly one way that some people validated. I think the most difficult is or really any form of validation that doesn't require things from other people, like kind of a self validation. Is it even, not to say is it possible, but it's certainly difficult to have validation kind of in a vacuum. There almost needs to be an observer of some kind that sees something and then, kind of says approval. And maybe it's just the fact that humans are social creatures and we have difficulty like living period in a vacuum. I'm not sure to what extent there have been any kind of studies on people living in solitude that has been any measure of successful, but there certainly does feel like there is this kind of social element of validation, and it's incredibly difficult to be validated without some kind of social, I guess, output or social evidence that you are validated. And sometimes that's through money, sometimes that's through fame, it's through, again, I don't know, or even fame on like some local level, even just like within a family. If you feel validated within an atomic family, that's still kind of a form of validation. But I think people now this is kind of also where ambition becomes viceful, even, because I think it would be healthy and almost sustainable to have validation that comes from within a family, right? You being maybe you're not the breadwinner of the family, or maybe you are, but maybe you're you keep things clean, you organize things, or you make all the food, or or just a handyman or something around this community or this village or this house or something. There's validation you get there. But if people cease to be validated with, what I call maybe more localized, decentralized environments, so settings where it's like, no matter how good and great your family is, you're never going to be validated within that structure. You have to like seek validation elsewhere. And I think if everyone looks for that, it's going to be kind of hard for that to work on a large scale, on a large level. Because I think older generations maybe were okay with just validation on a community basis, right? If you were, maybe if in the grand scheme of things in the world, you were like maybe a very like mid plumber, right? Your plumbing skills were, and again, I'm not saying that plumbing is an area where you need like supreme skills. There's this, greatest plumber in the world thing. Maybe like doctor or surgeon or something might be a better example to use. Um, but being well known and like the best in that small geographic area is enough for you to be validated and for you to, kind of have a reason to exist, right? Something to look forward to, something to do. You kind of got your validation that way. But now, if like even if you are the best, but that isn't good enough because you aren't the best, in the tri-state area, then I think there are problems that come from that. If being the best in your small area is never enough, or if the area that continues to grow, and then it's about beating out people that maybe aren't in the same city or town as you. And so as the ambitions grow, I wonder how difficult it is for people to still find ways to be validated, or are most people now invalidated in their occupations, their livelihoods, their families, their communities, where they don't feel like they do anything important. Which again, you can make a very strong argument that seems to be the case now more than ever. And I just think that kind of sets a bad precedent for the future, I suppose, if people aren't finding ways to be validated. And so part of that is one, kind of restoring the ability to measure, I guess, or to at least feel like you are the best milkman or the best paper deliverer or some sense. As if those occupations even exist anymore. But second is to quell like the ambition of like needing to be Hollywood in some sense, or needing to be the best of the best of the best of the best. It's like why must you be the absolute best, right? Of what happened to being kind of a hometown best, or being a local, being the best locally. Um, so I do kind of blame this like uh, unquelled ambition that's being fostered in all kinds of people. So children are not, they're taught that ambition of any kind and of any scale is all good. It's all good to want to do everything all the time. But again, the fact of the matter is, it's like, what percentage of people can be top 1%? Well, 1%. You can't have 60% of the people being top 1%. It's impossible. It doesn't make any. It's mathematically impossible. So some people just, again, genetics or environment and genetics or just unluckiness or whatever, will never reach this like threshold that is the only thing that's going to give them this like deep validation. So then you're kind of setting people up for this lifetime of feeling invalidated with things, which is not a great way to live. It'd be better to have kind of I don't know, a sensible amount of ambition, and understand that it's not about having the hottest wife or the tallest kids or something. Well, again, whatever the stupid measure is, I'm not in charge of who decides what or what people value. But I think if people are deluded that you can have or that it's even possible that 20% of people can fit into 2 percentage points. It's not. Only 2 can. So it's like, you're not going to be the tallest ever. It's like you can be the tallest in your area, and that has to be enough for you. Which is, again, not the message anyone wants to hear. And it's also hard because maybe you are actually the top 1%, and if here am I telling you that you should quell your ambitions and then now you like underachieve because you don't know how good you are in some sense. But I think now, especially like if you're looking for any amount of like fame or anything, it's like so not um sorry, I mean even fame, but even just like, I guess fame is kind of the way it is framed now. It's like, even if it's not even about who is like the best at anything, because I think even measuring the best is difficult. It's about who is like the most well known. I suppose there are some metrics for like that. It's like, who's the fastest? Like, all right, we can probably figure out using these, running time, who is the fastest. But like, who's the best actor? What does that mean, right? And who gets the opportunity even to even try, right? And it's like, who's the most popular? Or that's different, maybe page clicks or something. But even that popularity isn't based off of anything concrete that you could improve at anyway. I suppose marketability has some part of that, but then a lot of that is being deceitful, right? So like the more popular person that got that way being deceitful is not is still viewed as more popular, whether or not it was good or not. The all press is good press kind of thing. So I don't know. I just think it's difficult. You can't really have a societal structure that, again, I think the best way to look at it is trying to squeeze in 20% into 2% or 40% into 1%. It's impossible. So the 1% will exist anyway, but it's almost just like this. I don't know. Maybe it goes back to the whole ignorance is bliss thing. It's like maybe it was almost better for us to exist in ignorance of a lot of things. I am the best plumber in town. I don't know any other town. I'm like, because I don't know any other towns. I'm from this town. It's where I grew up. Not to make a case for this whole small town America thing, but there certainly was benefits to. There was great benefits to the ignorance, of like what's going on. You don't need to know, um, you know, because there's a lot of things you just don't need to know. I don't need to know this. It's completely pointless. Especially things that just serve to make you scared of things. I'm almost just very done and frustrated with like just how scared everyone is of everything all the time. It's like the number of people that like, why aren't you scared of retirement? It's like I don't give a fuck about my retirement. I don't care. Like why do I need to? I mean again, there's almost this elements of privilege you have to be able to be terrified about your retirement and your stocks all the time. Like I said before, there was this was this dude on Reddit or something that was like, he had like $2 million in savings and was terrified of losing his job. And I'm like, that you know how much fucking money that? And again, I know you live in Hollywood Hills, so it's probably the equivalent of like 100,000. But like, maybe you're just being a bitch. There's not really a better way to put it. You're a loser. Why are you scared of this? Being scared is such a folly, way to exist. It's just being terrified of everything all the time. Um, and again, if like, unless you really believe in this reincarnation thing, you're going to be around for millennia. But like, as far as we know, you really only have one life, and you have to utilize that in whatever way you think is best. But to spend it all, sitting on your couch in fear, or even frankly, to be sitting on your couch, period, what a waste. What are you doing, right? Go outside, do something that isn't going to be vegetating out and being scared of like some vague problem in the middle. Who cares? I don't know. You have one. Why not be bold, right? Or just live audaciously. Not to say you should have unquelled ambition and to stake your whole being on being the top 1%. I think there's a difference between being bold and trying things and like having to be the best. Because I think that those are often mixed up. Whereas like you can still be a bold person who tries things, who wants to achieve some level of whatever success means to them, which I don't know what that is, without having to like without putting your self-worth on the am I in the top 1%, right? Or do I have this amount of money? Or am I in this circle of whatever? I don't know. I think first we should disassociate this like sense of ambition with like this, I guess, target of achievement, right? I think I don't know, there's lots of good things about ambition, but achievement certainly isn't, you certainly can achieve more with higher ambitions, but I think unchecked ambition on a large scale, on a wide scale, if everybody is super ambitious, you're gonna have a lot of people that are disappointed with where they end up. But also just, I don't know. I think you don't want to, it's hard because you don't want to reward all of the wrong behavior with this. So if you reward, I guess, being bold and audacious and shooting for that top 1%, you get maybe more people doing that than those who could have achieved more on a smaller or local scale. I don't know. I don't know. I'll move on to something else here. Let's see. Hmm, I guess something related to the media in some kind. So that was interesting thinking about. I saw it mentioned somewhere. I can't quite remember. It was an older text, so I could have been like a blog or something. But this high context versus low context communication, and it kind of is self-explanatory, but I guess to explain it, uh, low context communication means that you can kind of jump in at any time, and you don't really need much. You don't need to know. Suppose if it's like a movie or something, you don't need to know who the characters are or really anything about what's going on. Maybe it's episodic in nature, where everything is kind of self-contained. The characters or things don't really matter that much, and there isn't much. Like I would say, an advertisement is perhaps the lowest context medium possible, meaning that you don't have to know anything. You don't have to be literate, uh, to be honest, to be able to know what an ad is, or what it's doing, what is it selling. It's like the lowest context form of communication possible, is an advertisement. Whereas high context communication, obviously as name implies, requires like maybe deeper knowledge of who's involved or what is involved. It's like if you read, if you aren't a tech person, you're reading like an obscure article on the dark web about I don't know, routing all your traffic through Tor. There's a fair bit of context you'll have to know. Like, first of all, what the hell is Tor? What are these internet protocols that this person's talking about? I don't know anything. And it's just interesting to think about what percentage or what amount of our information is high context versus low context. And I think the push toward everything being a low context uh, communication medium is problematic just for intellectual development. I'll even say as a generic term. So even things like music, where maybe sometimes it's important to understand the uh, I'll say even just like the historical significance of a piece or the context in which a piece was produced. And not to get snobby about it or like act like you have to listen to like, you can't just listen to like, brainless techno. Again, there's a place for all of this. Um, but like to exclude one or to, you know, deeply prioritize one over the other, I think is really the problem. And because everything is, pretty much an ad now at this point, uh, you kind of snuff out a lot of this higher context communication, and now that's kind of being relegated to slot. I mean, even with AI agents or AI models or whatever, you can see that there is this push towards lowering the context uh, requirement for pieces of for information. So it's not important what context this information was gathered from, or where you got it, or what's it saying, or what's involved. It's all about, okay, how can I, as someone that knows nothing, jump in here and start making decisions? It's like, okay, I don't think that's what we need. It's more people to just, without knowing anything, with having no knowledge of information security, setting up your router. Like, really, would you trust your grandma with just with AI bot to like set it? No, I wouldn't. And I think what part of what AI is doing, or the agents or whoever now, whatever is the new thing, is again lowering this context requirement for information. Not to say that there shouldn't, like, not to say that low context information or low context communication shouldn't ever exist, but there are certainly, it's a lot more valuable and a lot like high context communication. Sometimes it's just people speaking in code, and it's just it's kind of pointless. It wouldn't matter whether it's high or low context, but uh, I think also what higher context includes is like nuance, right? I think low context things discards any nuance, right? It kind of doesn't allow for answering or asking any questions. So same with like an ad, like you can show me an ad and I'll have like questions about it, but then it's over. There's no discussion, there's no answering. It's just, and it's 5 seconds and there's a little jingle, and it's like, well, I have all these questions about not only this like questionable product or about like the claims that were made in this thing, but who cares that this is all high context stuff and this is a low context medium, and now you don't get to ask any of your questions because it's not important, right? What's important is that you just watch this, or whatever. um, I view it as dangerous if there's not really, if the requirement for context is now so low. Nothing requires context anymore. Nothing, and by extension, nothing requires any nuance. Nuance is kind of a old forgotten thing, right? To have nuance in something, or to I guess look at things with balance, or maybe understand that there's some ambiguity with some of this, because again, I think I'd argue that there is very little that requires no nuance. I think everything requires nuance. And even, as dangerous as this is to say, really, even like, terrorist ideology, again, deserves some nuance. And I'm not, again, terrorism is one kind of word to just attach to things, but what does it mean to be a terrorist, right? Like, what do you exactly call inciting for violence, right? What is the threshold there that require, like, when is it, simply perhaps I don't know, a satire, rhetorical question, and when is it you are a terrorist, right? Because I think these are like, again, there's nuance to this. I'm not say that's like, well, you so you don't condemn murderers. It's like, well, I didn't even say that. It has nothing to do with murder. I'm asking about uh, what constitutes terrorism, right? I think these are nuanced debates we should be having, and not like again, these are high context, I guess, pathways of communication. And I think we need to retain as much of the high context communication as we can. Otherwise, we're fucked, pretty much. So that's all I'll say on that. Let's see here. This was like, I don't know. This kind of sounds like a pothead thought, and I promise you I'm not high watch or saying this or thinking of this. But I was just thinking about like time is interesting because time is a construct in some way. Like we kind of invented. We didn't really invent time. We maybe discovered or invented it. I don't know. But it uh, I argue that it kind of passes at the time at the speed at which we think about. So like the number of the amount of time, or I'll even that's kind of meta, but the amount of time you spend between noticing that time has passed is the speed of time, which again is a very, very like self-defining, wrapping way of saying it. But it was what I was thinking about, because it's like if you think about like what time it is, maybe every we'll just say for example, now and a lot of this happens like subconsciously, so it's not like you're aware that you're asking yourself what time it is all the time. But suppose then that you're thinking about the clock every 5 seconds, or maybe every 5 microseconds or something like that. Time then obviously passes a lot faster if you're thinking about it less often. So the more often you're thinking about the passage of time, uh, the less often the faster it goes, which is interesting. So if you really want to make the most of your time, I think thinking about it passing would make it pass slower. Which again is a conclusion that I'm not sure I agree with, but it's just what is the conclusion of that original thought was that the speed of time is passing is how often you think about it. So I don't know. Part of what I was thinking about was like, um, I spent a lot of time in a car, so I was thinking about how to make time pass faster. And then there's obviously a lot of drugs that impact your your perception of time. Some things happen slower on these drugs or faster on these drugs. And so I was wondering about, okay, what about the impact that these drugs have on the subconscious that make time feel slower or feel faster? And I think it's kind of your subconscious tether to time passing and the awareness of time passing. Because again, as like animals wouldn't have any conception of time passing at all, really. Um, but it's not to say that they're on drugs or that they don't know that time exists or time doesn't exist for them. I suppose in some very vague sense, it doesn't really, they don't have a watch, doesn't exist in that sense. Um, but it certainly exists in the sense that they, die. They're born and they were born at one time and they hunt at this time and they die at this time. They sleep at this time, whatever. Um, Time still has a impact on their lives, but it certainly isn't, it's a much different relationship than our relationship with time as humans, which is like, what time is it? I have a meeting tomorrow at 1, that kind of time. So it's just interesting to think about, I'll just say like the passage of time, and relative to, how we think about it, and then my other kind of extension on that was like drugs, I guess. Why do some drugs make people feel like time passes slower or faster? Um, and I'm not advocating for anyone doing drugs to figure this out. I don't think it requires drugs to be. It's just interesting to, I guess, look at that in relation to our subconscious and how we perceive certain things. So anyway, that was just an interesting thought about time that I had. It's about time to move on to something else because I'm done with that one already. Let's see here. I'm gonna. Yeah, this is a kind of a shorter bit I have just about general things. I probably have said this before that I don't like having favorites on things. I just generally try to avoid picking favorites. Not that I don't have favorites. I mean, I have preferences, obviously, but uh, they always say like in some probably some philosopher was like you don't pick a favorite star. And it's not because there's some stars aren't beautiful or some things, but there are simply just too many. And I think it's not you limit your options when you pick a favorite, right? Whereas if I say that like my favorite bagel is the everything bagel because it's got everything, how could you hate it? Um, you then kind of subconsciously or consciously now have kind of sequestered your options for bagels. Not say that you don't other pick other bagels or whatever, but in that you have a favorite, you are kind of tethered to that favorite. And it makes sense from this like kind of capitalist regime thing to want to have favorites because then you're loyal to things, right? You have a favorite car brand, you're loyal to this car, or you have a favorite, dessert. You're now loyal to this dessert or this drink type or something like that. So sure, if I have a favorite beverage, it's a water. Great. Yeah, now I'm loyal to almost nothing. But like having a favorite, soft drink is like Coca-Cola. Okay, now I'm kind of loyal to Coca-Cola, and I'm not really. I'm less open now to trying other things. Now, granted, you should never pick a favorite of anything that is, I would say, is not good for you in that sense. You could have a favorite vegetable, maybe that is fine, but then it's the big veggie controlling you. Whatever. Either way, I just think I'm against a lot of picking favorites only because of how it. I think it kind of it limits your choice. I'm in favor uh, of having choice and exercising autonomy and choice. And related to products or not, I think not having favorites, or at least not naming favorites, you can kind of subliminally or subconsciously have them, but not naming them gives you a lot more power to be autonomous and to make independent decisions in certain circumstances, or independent decisions regardless of circumstance, that allow you to broaden your horizons or discover something new. So all this to say, you shouldn't pick a favorite star because there are too many of them, and all of them are beautiful in their own right, or it depends on the time of day, right? And if you spend your time looking at your favorite star, you're going to lose perhaps a lot of other very beautiful stars that you're not seeing because you're too busy focused on your favorite. So I don't like to say that I have favorite things, but that isn't entirely true. I do have things that I prefer, but either way, I generally have a sentiment against picking or choosing favorites. Yeah, I guess the last thing, which I definitely want to talk a lot more about this, is mathematics. So I've been thinking about mathematics. I've been reading, I've read a couple books on mathematics. I'm reading a book right now, not on any topic of mathematics in general, but I'm thinking about just the paradigm itself of mathematics. And the question I keep coming back to, which is hard to say definitively, but I am going to say something definitively, is mathematics invented or discovered? And really what that boils down to meaning is that when mathematicians will say make new discoveries or craft new inventions, is it just simply a new framework in which they've made something up? And I guess because language is made up and we've made that up, math too is then also made up. So it's kind of impossible for math to be discovered if we invented language and we invented mathematics. So therefore, it's like any mathematical things. But there are a lot of I'll say mathematical inventions that feel a lot more like discoveries. And I think some of this might just be serendipitous uncovering of kind of the same phenomena, just in different clothes, so to speak. So I don't have great mathematical examples on hand, and even so, they'd probably be so niche as to be unhelpful in this context. But there certainly are, again, mathematical discoveries that feel a lot like they are discovered. So with the central question being, is it discovered or invented? My answer is it is invented. But it's not to say that mathematics is useless in that sense. But I think a lot of what people study or people generate are then like, well, we're going to call these things, and these things, those things. And now we have a new formula that relates these things to those things, which never is a new thing. It's like, well, okay, but you gave a lot of things new names. It's like, I think the more like discovered parts of mathematics are ones that you're not defining. Can you do this without defining any new terms, right? And often they're like the most simple little breakthroughs. They're not complicated, like super verbose ideas that involve a bunch of new names and new things. That they're often like very dumb, simple things that just involve like a very few small amount of things that is then related in a way that is deeply profound. Even with like calculus or geometry especially is very prevalent. It's just like always like stupid, simple. And you're like, oh, this is very, very simple. And those like feel like discoveries in some sense. Whereas like if it's like, well, we defined, anthropolymorphic shapes as these things. And it's like, all right, well then that you definitely just made that word up so you could, discover something. When in reality, it's like you didn't, that's not even really, I mean, it's a real thing because you just named it that, but it's not real in any like cosmic or absolute sense. Although technically none of math is, but that's why I do think a lot of being a successful mathematician now is more, can you be compelling in what you are inventing, the words you're using, your little argument you're crafting, is it compelling? The words that you choose to use, right? The representations that you have the words in, are they compelling? That is really what I'll say kind of the job of the mathematician is now. Whereas I think it used to be more of a discovery based thing. It's less of that and more of an invention based thing. So I don't know, which is unfortunate, but I do kind of err on the side of a lot of mathematics now being invented, which is too bad because I mean, I'm not to say there is a lot of just value in mathematics, and it's very helpful both on like an economic and a societal level, as well as just an intellectual vector of exploration. It's just concerning now that too much of it is now is curated and invented. It seems I don't know. I'm looking for the word, but I can't find the word. But either way, maybe I'll find it next time. But yeah, I'll cut it off there. Thanks for watching.